We exited the crate, and while I expected sensors and proximity alarms to start screaming, we managed to avoid attracting any attention. Of course, the Fads could have silent alarms and might be closing in on our position at that exact second, but I decided to remain optimistic. I scanned the room, looking for cameras or other security measures that would trip us up, but I didn't find anything. I knew that the Fads had a strict culture, one in which creative thinking and indulging in wild speculation were frowned upon. During the pre-mission briefing, Adjul Ip had explained that this was one of the reasons their highest-level scientific research was conducted at a remote facility. They wanted their scientists to feel free to experiment without facing the sort of scorn and condemnation such free thinkers were generally subject to in Phatic society. The security to get in, and especially out, of the facility was very tight, but once inside I could rely on my own senses to make certain I was unobserved. All around me were workstations, mainly pale green countertops. Many of them had clear plastic boxes subdivided into drawers for storing materials of various sorts. But these stations were otherwise empty. I guess they didn't need computers, since, like in the Confederation, the Fads had personal data devices that could produce a screen and keyboard at will. All of that meant that there would be nothing here to give me a clue about finding the others. I turned to Volonic. Don't you have, an amazing sense of smell or something?
I have never won any smelling competitions, if that's what you're asking.
Okay, on my planet, we don't have sniffing competitions because sniffing is something no one's good at. I have to think that even an embarrassingly mediocre sniffer like you could give us an edge. Can you smell any of them? He pointed his face upward and sniffed the air.
No,
he said. Well then, let's just give up and go home.
Aren't we here to find them?
Yes, Volonic, that's why we're here. Maybe we should go sniff in some other places?
I see,
he said, grinning.
You are being funny. We are joking, as buddies are inclined to do.
We approached the door, which hissed open to reveal a deserted hallway. It was another instance of the Fad scientists needing to feel free of scrutiny in order to indulge in scientific creativity. I felt sure that if we were seen, plenty of guards would come pouring out of nowhere, but for now we were safe. Volonic sniffed the air like a werewolf ready to maul a minor character, and then walked quickly away from me. I followed along, forcing myself not to ask questions. I didn't want to mess with his sniffing mojo. Volonic passed about 5 doors and then stopped in front of one.
There's something in here,
he said. What sort of something?
I'm not certain. It smells sort of like you.
Like me? One of the other humans? Volonic didn't answer. He just kept sniffing. I raised my wrist to the door scanner, and the security override that Adjul Ip had given me did its work. The door hissed open. The room inside, like the one we'd come out of, was deserted. It was a similar space of workstations, but this one looked less neat. There were materials spread out all over the various surfaces, like someone wanted to continue what they were doing when they started their next shift. There were no prisoners, but that didn't stop Volonic. He kept walking around the room, sniffing. I was about to tell him to knock it off, since none of our friends were here, but he seemed to be seriously engaged, and I was curious. What exactly had he been smelling? He went over to a workstation and picked up a glass container, bulbous on the bottom and narrow at the top, basically an alien test tube. It contained what appeared to be blood.
This is it,
he said.
I believe it's yours.
I walked over and picked up the container. It certainly seemed to be blood, but I had no way of knowing whose. Are you sure?
It smells exactly like you.
How had Phatic scientists gotten a hold of my blood? And what did they plan to do with it? The second part was easy, actually. After I'd shown them how much butt I could kick back on Earth, they wanted to figure out what my nanites were up to so they could reverse engineer Tamrat's work. Maybe they hadn't even realized our skill trees were hacked. Maybe they approached augmentation from a purely mechanical perspective rather than focusing on hardware. That left the question of where this blood sample had come from. I remembered. Back to the fight with Ardov in Central Park. I'd seen him put a cloth with my blood in a little plastic container. I had not been bleeding nearly this much, but it was possible they had been able to replicate more blood from the few drops Ardov had taken. The only reason they would want to do that would be to study the nanites I'd received at the Hidden Fortress. I seriously doubted they were looking to make an army of Zeke clones. I was about to put down the test tube when I noticed the blood was moving. I almost dropped it because moving blood is pretty much by definition gross. Little tendrils of the stuff were pushing up along the sides of the glass like they wanted to return to the business of circulating. There was no way I was letting the stuff back inside, though. Then I realized it wasn't trying to return to me, it was trying to get away from something. I'd been holding it close to another container, one filled with yellowish powder, and the blood seemed to not like it. Experimentally, I moved the blood a little closer, and it pushed away from the side of the glass. I wonder if it's magnetic, I said.
I don't think so,
said Volonic. His voice had an unusual tone, like he was actually thinking about things. He took the vial from my hand and moved it back and forth, closer to the powder and then away several times.
It's not consistent movement like you would see with natural force, such as magnetism. It's more like a fear response.
I took the vial away from him again and tried the experiment. I think you're right. I stared at him. Every once in a while, I thought Volonic might not be so much of an idiot as he seemed to be. Either that, or he simply noticed something completely obvious that I had missed, which by no means made him a genius. I moved the vial around experimentally a few more times, not quite sure what I was looking for. This seemed to be important. During one pass, I moved a little too close to another powder, this one pale blue in color, and the blood reacted entirely differently. It seemed to want to get closer to the blue powder. I found a pair of metal tweezers and grabbed a few grains of blue powder. I dropped it into the blood. There was a little bit of swirling, but otherwise nothing happened. I then moved it closer to the container of blue powder, and the blood moved towards it, only this time more forcefully. I moved it closer to the yellow powder, and it pushed away. You know what I think? I said. They are experimenting on ways to strengthen and weaken nanites.
Perhaps that is how they shut down your system,
Volonic suggested. I turned to him, again thinking I might have underestimated his intelligence. What makes you think they shut me down? Tamret decided that the tech was in a natural state of decay.
That's true, he said, but it seems a bit strange that you suffered such a complete and embarrassing failure while fighting with Ardov. The very same fellow who took our friends and brought them here. And here is where you found this material. It seems more likely that you were exposed to something that harmed you during the fight.
I grabbed the container of blue powder. Maybe if I eat some of this, I'll go back to full strength.
I can think of nothing wiser than consuming an unknown chemical found in an evil alien lab,
Volonic said. Now he was calling me out for being stupid. This was a new low. At least he was developing a sense of humor. Do you have a better idea? I asked.
No, he admitted, but you don't know what that is. Too much, or even too little, might kill you. Maybe it is meant to be injected, or turned into a cream that is rubbed on your skin. You cannot simply eat mysterious experimental chemicals and hope for the best.
On the one hand, you are making a lot of sense, but on the other, I don't care. I found a small vial and scooped a bunch of the powder inside. The vials had screw-on lids, so I sealed it and put it in my pocket. The moment the vial made contact with my skin, I saw it again, the flicker from my HUD. It was just for a second, but it was there. The flash of static and scroll of text. It was real. There had been none of this blue powder back at the Renegade base, but I had no doubt that this time the powder had caused the moment of life. It was like my augments were trying to reboot. As much as it pained me to admit it, though, Volonic was right. This stuff could kill me or turn me into a raving lunatic. Or, in the tradition of most classic origin stories, it could turn me into a superhero. For now, I'd simply keep some with me. Maybe we would be able to gain access to the files. If I could see the research notes, it was possible I could figure out a way of restoring my abilities. In the meantime, I was wandering around a phatic research facility with no one to depend on but Volonic. Admittedly, he'd done pretty well thus far, but I wasn't anxious to give him enough time to do something dim-witted. This is all interesting, I admitted, but we still need to find the others. Volonic nodded. He went back into the hallway and took some deep sniffs, but he shook his head. He wasn't getting anything, so we walked a little longer. I checked my data bracelet, which was automatically set to adjust to local time. It was still deep in the middle of the night, which was good, but we couldn't keep wandering forever. Pretty soon we were going to have to deal with early risers, and that meant conflict. After about half an hour of hapless exploration, Volonic picked up on a scent. We went through a few hallways until I heard what sounded like movement. I gestured for him to stop and be quiet, and miraculously he understood. Pressing my back to the wall, I peered around the corner and saw 2 guards standing in front of a heavy door. It had to be the entrance to where the prisoners were kept. The 2 fads were wearing some kind of body armor, quite possibly something that would resist PPB fire. On the other hand, maybe it wouldn't. 2 quick shots and we could be past them. There was also the chance that weapons fire would trigger an alarm. Adul Ip hadn't had any details about the specifics of their security setup, and he warned us not to use energy weapons except in emergencies. What were my options then? We had the injectors convex icosahedron had given us, but there was no way to get close enough to these guys without them seeing us. What we needed was some sort of distraction. If this were a video game, I could toss a rock or something, and the guards would blunder over to investigate. But I had a feeling this technique didn't work so well in real life. Besides, there were no rocks or anything to throw, and no way to toss them except by revealing myself to the guys. I hated to risk a frontal assault, but with every minute that passed, we had less of a chance of succeeding with the rescue. I was about to turn to Volonic and begin explaining this to him, but I realized he was already moving past me, PPB pistol out. He squeezed off 2 shots, both of them quite good. He hit the guards in the head, and they both went down. I turned to him. "Why did you do that?" I demanded.
I didn't see that there was any other option, he said, and I thought you might have been having difficulty making up your mind to proceed. I decided to take the burden on myself.
"And if it set off an alarm?"
"Then it would be my fault," he said, "and you wouldn't have to feel bad about making a mistake."
I took a deep breath. "That is very nice of you, I guess. But maybe we should discuss decisions of this magnitude?"
"I am trying to be more like Tamret," he said. "She does not overthink things, she acts."
"She thinks plenty," I said. "That's why the things she does tend to work out." I gestured towards the guards. He gestured towards the guards.
"Well, this worked out."
I did not have the energy to argue with his success. "From now on, we discuss, okay? But thanks." We went over to the door and used our bracelets to trigger the lock. It clicked open. There were no guards waiting for us on the other side, so that was good. I crouched down to pull one of the sleeping guards into the room when I saw his eyes were open. I almost jumped back, thinking he was about to get up and go phatic crazy on me. Then I saw his eyes weren't moving. They were blank and still, like dull marbles. I turned to Volonic, and I had to force myself to choke out the words. "Did you kill these guys?"
"Of course. You can see they're dead."
I felt revulsion crawl through me. But at the dead guy or what Volonic had done, or both, I couldn't say. "But why?"
"They're fads," he said simply.
"So is Adul Ip."
"These are enemy fads. If we had given them a chance, they would have killed us."
"That's not the point," I said, my voice hard. I couldn't believe he had killed them. That wasn't how I did things, how the beings with me did things. "They're grunts," I told him, trying to keep from sounding hysterical. "It's not their fault they were born into this culture. They think they're doing the right thing. You can't just kill anyone who gets in your way, not if you have another choice. Don't you feel bad about doing this?"
"Of course not," he said. "They're aliens."
"I'm an alien from your perspective."
"This is a silly conversation, Zeke. I understand your objection, but we no longer need to worry about these 2 walking around. They are dealt with. Forever. Now, can we please move on?"
"No more killing," I said to him. You have to give me your weird rural deity word.
Very well, he sighed. If it will make you happy, I promise not to kill anyone unless I see no alternative.
We dragged the dead fads inside and closed the door again. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched Volonic, realizing how little I knew and understood him. I'd thought he was just an idiotic bumbler, a guy fate had stuck me with because fate thought it was hilarious. It turned out he had a dark streak, or possibly an amoral one. Maybe it was rural culture, but I had never seen Tamret show this kind of disregard for life, and she was the least rule-bound person I'd ever met. It was true enough that I'd played a part in events in which beings had died, but those had been space battles, when I'd been fighting to keep myself and my friends alive. You don't really have an option of knocking an enemy ship on the head. There are huge weapons involved, and ships can explode or leak oxygen, or do all sorts of things you can't control. The first time I'd used weapons on another ship, I'd gone after the enemy with everything I had, but I'd learned my lesson. In my second battle with the fads, when I'd understood more about how the weapons worked, I'd done my best to keep the damage to a minimum. More importantly, while I knew I'd acted justifiably, that I'd done the best I could each time to save my own ship, I still felt bad about the beings who died. They had been my enemies, and they had been doing their best to kill me and beings I cared about, but most of them had still just been doing their jobs. Maybe they knew the Phatic Empire was a bad place, but it was their culture. They had friends and relationships and children to go back to. They weren't evil, cackling villains, and that made a difference to me. It didn't seem to make a difference to Volonic, though.